Because the smallness of our being is our only greatness? Because one night I was in a room listening until only one heart beat? Because in these last years I've worn and nearly worn out my black funeral shoes? Because the gesture of afterwards means the same thing no matter who speaks them? Because faith, belief, forever are only words, no matter. Because matter disappears, always and eventually. Because action is not matter, but energy that spent changes being. And if death too is a change of being, perhaps action counts. And if death is a land of unknowing, perhaps we do well to live with uncertainty. And if death is a forested land, it would be good to learn trees. And if death is a kingdom, it would be good to practice service. And if death is a foreign state, we should loosen allegiance to this one. And if the soul leaves our body, then we must rehearse goodbye. Okay, so now I do want to do a poem that will introduce me to you by way of my family. I have a large extended family, but there are a few people here in this poem because I think that our identity is really enmeshed in the people and the places and the stories that inhabit us. Family tree. A boxer grandfather who once fought Star Bad Boy, who sired 6 beer-drinking German sons, all with the same big hands. The grandmother I never knew, who might be responsible for the heft of my thighs, is for certain the origin of my father's sauerkraut and fine venison sausage, perhaps for his sweet tooth, and maybe mine too. My father who turned those boxer hands to percussion and gesture, tapping and clapping and snapping the quick-step songs, but buttercupping the fingertips to croon on bended knee the long-drawn Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa, men have loved you. My Chippewa grandmother, who was a midwife and medicine gatherer, tiny twig of a woman who bore 12 children, bore the loss of 2 babies to influenza, the loss of 1 grown son to white man's war, and the loss of a generation, limbo Indians, turned to alcohol. My Indian grandpa, who squints darkly into cameras of the past, who raised 2 generations on rocky bottom allotted land, 28 slow horse miles from the village store, his crinkled story eyes, my first memory at 2. My mother, born of dawn, in a reckless moon of miscegenation, whose foot rode the pedals on 50 years of Singer's sewing machine, her needles dancing rituals on a ribbon shirt, blending our jagged, mismatched edges in a crazy quilt. 2 uncles who ran away from Pipestone Indian boarding school, and an auntie who stayed, who lost her fingers, saw them caught, mangled in the laundry press, who beaded, kneaded, quilted, and braided her way through 4 children, just the same. Houses and fish camps full of cousins who rotated authority on marbles, sex, and skunk etiquette, whose probation blues and 49 songs deprived me of bee stings, broken bones, swimmer's itch, drunken despair, and suicide, in whose tangled litters, blonde and black-haired softball players, I fearlessly set down my suckling babies. My great-grandfather, Niwan, Miniwanagos, lover of natural things, whose antel heart I am said to bear, who carried his name with humbleness, as I try to, and sometimes with rage, fire brown eyes sharp as any weapon, who cupped his hands around fertile seeds, brown fingers, the pine cone, shelled house of protection, all my relations. So, a sense that I'm not deadly serious, at least not all the time. This is from my first book, so see I'm doing the book thing. First one, second. And I thought also, since we're in a museum, and there is this sense of living history in a museum, I would read this poem. But you have to keep in mind that the voice of this poem, you know how poems are not always autobiographical, right? I have to say this one is autobiographical. However, it is a much younger me, okay? So you can't think of me, you have to think like this young lady, or there was a really beautiful young lady I saw earlier. Think of someone like 20 years younger. Living history. Walked into Pinehurst, sunburned, smelling of fish. Big Indian man paying for some gas and a six-pack, looking at me hard. Dreamer, I think, too old for me. Heads right toward me. Geez, he says, you look just like your mom. You must be Marlene's girl. Pinches my arm, but I guess it's yours he touches. Hell, wasn't even looking at me. Wonder if I'm what they call living history. But don't you feel that, you know, sometimes people see, if you come from a small community, people see in you the face of all your relatives and so on. It's just that intergenerational thing, and I think it's kind of tough when you're young, right? And you really don't want to look like your parents, but there comes a certain point in time where it's like really comforting to look in the mirror and say, wow, that's my mom, you know, or that's my grandpa's nose, or whatever it is, you know, that sort of connection at some point starts to be welcome, you know, and it really gives you a sense of legacy. And actually, see, I have a plan, and I'm going to change my plan. If I can find this, I think it's, there's a poem, yes. The Cream City Review is a journal that UWM has, the graduate students publish. At UWM, the graduate students had this wonderful journal called Cream City Review. And they do this thing called Throwback Thursday. So they every so often they will pick a poem from some prior issue and feature it on their website and then sell that issue for a special price. Well, last Thursday they did this poem for Throwback Thursday. And just when I was talking about that sense of legacy and the connection we have to our family, I thought this one might actually work well to read. I think, looking out here, that some of you may actually know there's some little ditties that are in here on the side. Sometimes, you know, poetry has more than one voice at work at the same time, and this is one of those. And I guess I could say something else about this one is, originally I wrote this poem because I would see these photos of my mother with like one or another handsome young man who wasn't my father, you know? And I kind of wondered about who's that guy, what's the story? And then as time passed, I realized that, like we all do, I had my own collection of those kind of photos, you know, put away in a drawer somewhere. So it's called Your Old Lost Loves. For I have left the same handsome men standing in photos with that girl from my past, seen them grow younger, leaner, taller each year, hearing their deep, fine words in the rustle of each fall's leaves. Together, barefoot we walk country roads ankle deep in mud, I turn to you, young laughing ghost, hubba hubba, never quite matching your daring, ooh la la. I need those memories, 14 kids and no papa. Some lovers I know in stories, some by heart, for I stand just as you did on the same lake shore, watching darkness come, suns setting in unison, casting long shadows, one after another, across the years. Old lost loves, you and I, clasping identical dark hands, smelling of clay and damp pine, hearing again song of owl and loon, endless and lonesome, lingering night sounds, bouncing, echoing forever, back and forth across a single lake called time. Okay, so again, because we're in a museum, I thought I have a few works that are what we call ekphrastic poems. That is, that they're written in conversation with another kind of art. You know, either a painting, a photograph, a song, so that there tends to be, you know, sort of this other thing that you're bouncing your words off of. And a number of years ago, I was at the University of Oklahoma in Norman at a visit, and they have the collection of photographs there that are kind of interesting, Western history collection of photographs. And I found in there one really, really curious image. So one thing about a lot of the photos of Native people is they tend to be of the so-called vanishing Indian, right? That sort of stereotypic vanishing Native person, a kind of static representation of Indians that were supposed to disappear. But guess what? We're still here. So this particular image that I saw was of this striking woman, but she was sitting, so it was a Native woman in Native dress, but she was sitting on an ornate Victorian chair. Okay, and then around her was this huge, like, see the size of that mirror, but maybe even bigger, this huge frame was around her, like in the photo, you know, not a frame that was on the photo, but in the photo itself. And then she had really, really long hair, and she had her hair draped outside of that frame. So it was clear that there was some irony at work here. Like, somebody is saying, I refuse to be, you know, like, frozen in time, but I'm going to break out of that imaginary representation, that stereotypic representation. At least that's the way that I read it. So then I wrote this poem, which is called Framing. An Irwin Brothers Indian in a studio photograph, a file number in a Western history collection of classic invented Indians. Solemn face, long dark hair, just another sepia memory with reality leaching away like a winding red stream from a cracked inkwell. The irony of American Gothic. A lone Comanche woman posed on an ornate Victorian chair. But this Ogichi breaks out. Her wavy, waist-length hair, deliberately draped over one corner of a large wood frame, joins the dark of her layered skirt. Together they become the swift pony on which she counts coup, rides her escape from the still life, the Catlin Curtis colonized lookalikes. Mashit, warrior woman, Aniwewe Batu, run away, making noise. Okay, so then let's see. I have done quite a bit of traveling with my poetry, and Nick mentioned that I've been translated in some languages. One of the most recent trips was to the Kingdom of Bahrain, and it was the October before the Arab Spring. And I could talk about this endlessly because it was really quite an amazing journey. I met really interesting people, lots of things I could talk about, but I really just want to read a very short, slight poem. As you know, I mean, we couldn't follow everything that was happening in all the different countries in the Arab Spring, right? There was lots happening here, lots happening there. And in the Kingdom of Bahrain, I spent one evening with the Bahraini Writers Association. And it was supposed to be kind of like this. You come in, you read for a few minutes, answer a few questions, sign a few books, and you go. So I'm thinking, I'll get back to my hotel in time for a late dinner. But it was not like that at all, because the people there were literally on fire. It's like they were ready to do something to change their life. And part of, in other countries, I think probably maybe more than the US, there's this really melding of writing and politics. And there, like, the poetry and politics were just together. And so it went late into the night where they would, you know, talk about their ideas, share their work, ask me questions, and so on. And so I wasn't at all surprised to find that when the Arab Spring came and when there was a revolution in that country, it was in that very city that I visited. The hotel I stayed in looked down on the square where the people gathered, and a 21-year-old woman was arrested and imprisoned for reading a poem that was said to incite revolution. And she was held from October to, I believe it was April, and when she was finally let go, she was tortured. She was, you know, you can look for the story. But it's not the only story of that time and the people that struggled. So, long story, small poem. Unlawful assembly. Don't hurry to safety. Each hour your flowered room grows smaller. Everywhere at the periphery of vision, windows shatter into triangles of mosaic white. There, in the lonely fragments, a YouTube director declares victory. Blood flattens and darkens. The scent of rebellion, smoke, fire, and ash, all pungent in the still images sacrificed to history. Somewhere the flapping door of an overturned wagon thumps steadily in a deserted street, echoes absent hands. Okay, so I feel like I should go more playful. So there's an exhibit that's happening right now at the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art, and I'm going to go over there this week, and they invited poets to do ekphrastic poems with one of the images there. And so this one I thought, this is the very first time I've ever reading it. It might change between now and, you know, when I do it next time. But I wanted to try it out on you, so feel free to, you know, give me feedback and whatever. But the image is by Eric and Heather Chan Schatz. They kind of put their names together, and it's called The Next Generation Millennials from Around the World. And they do abstract work. This is a whole abstract exhibit. And what it is, in the image that I was working with, is it's very, very vibrant color, like oranges and pinks and so on. And it looks, in my mind, okay, abstract, but the way I'm looking at it is a lot of blooming and vegetation and flowers and things, but it's all like a lot, like all tangled together and overlapping. But also, some of the sort of round shapes looked really a lot to me like those geometric designs you'd make with a compass, remember? Or later on with a spirograph. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of like my entrance into that abstract painting. So this is called Of Fractals and Pink Flowering. Imagine the geometry of flower is hunger for balance, is my child's hand on the gears of beauty, layering and interlocking color. Picture me prone, a small center point, one copper dot in the white Minnesota winter. Picture my mother drying her hands, placing the compass and spinning arcs and intersecting curves, woodland flowers growing into many-petaled mandalas, into limitlessness, a universe of circles, of symmetry, sun, stars, blooms, and orange-hued fruits, the berry, squash, ripe tomato wonder of belonging. My own spirograph bursts rush forth, ornate like paisley, like fireworks against dark summer sky, spokes and wheels and gears meshing, a hopeful threading of the cogs of longing. Imagine my fingers holding tight to the friction, watch the intricate flourishes appear on white paper, the tabula rasa transformed by oval. Just another language, another voice saying hello to the spiraling bodies of self. Imagine my psychedelic Crayola yearning, my January pining after purple florals, the cosmos, the daisy mix, he loves me not on Gurney's seed packs. Now watch as we carve splendor. My world is medicine wheel and hand drum, is powwow bustle and beadwork in woodland design. The sweep of nature tallied by curve, by eye, assembled now as scarlet fractals, as collage of vines, tassels, seed pods, and a child's simple pink infinity. So I think I should finish. I think my time is that about right? Something like that? One more poem, does that sound good? Yes. Is there a poem that you want, that somebody out there wants, knows and wants? Otherwise, it's catch as catch can. Okay, so I think there's a poem, again, it's sort of, I feel like you set a mood tonight, and I keep sort of gravitating towards that mood. And so I think, let's see. Not the one I planned, okay, this one. Okay, so while I've been at UWM, I've had this like amazing, wonderful experience with colleagues and students, and I said via Sunday night is that the thing I love about teaching is all of the wonderful, apparently tireless students that I get to work with. And the thing I hate about teaching is all the wonderful, tireless students I get to work with who then leave and go somewhere else, right? Yeah, so teaching is like they keep leaving you. They keep leaving you. And so there's something about that that's difficult, I think. You know, like you get all these wonderful, fresh minds. Well, the good part is that when you're at a campus, you also have all these amazing colleagues, right, who do stick around most of the time. And when I first came to UWM, I don't know how many of you might have encountered him or known of his work, but Bill Harold was one of the poetry faculty. And I would tell you one thing is that a student came into my class one day and said, Professor Harold said he saw an angel in the elevator. And I'm like, okay, I hadn't met Professor Harold yet, and I'm thinking, who is this guy? But you know, as I got to know him, I thought he probably really did see an angel in the elevator. He was just that kind of guy, you know. So he was such an amazing soul. And I also believe, don't think I'm crazy, but I believe he could bilocate. Like you could see him at like one place, and then suddenly he's like somewhere else. And he just was a fascinating, incredible guy. And this poem doesn't really do him justice, but it is about. I was trying when he died. He died actually grading student papers. You know, it was like he literally just like fell asleep on his desk. So he just tipped over onto his desk, and what before him was his students' work, because he was just one of those teachers that people get once in a lifetime and really, you know, remember them forever. And I was trying to think of how to honor that memory. And I guess I can't explain it, but for me, there's also this thing about, for me, nature and spirit are just one and the same almost, you know. It's like my entrance into understanding spirituality is oftentimes through the avenue of nature, and maybe that's because of my native heritage and the way that I was schooled in having a interdependent relationship, a reciprocity with the natural world. And so I also kind of feel like there is this way in which what we think of as this is reality or this is solid or this is real is not necessarily always the case, And so I'm one of those people who's willing to think that I might be the imaginary creation and there's something else more real than me. Okay, I know I sound like a nut, but there's more. I mean, I'm just giving you some silly lines. But in fact, this poem, 2 things you should know: a cricket. The speed at which a cricket chirps changes with the temperature. So you can actually tell the temperature by the speed of a cricket's chirp. Bill Harold also had this really interesting stance, partly because he had some physical things. So he would often stand like this, and I have a quirky poet mind, and that looked like a cricket. And the little cricket arms sticking out. Okay, so those 2 things going into this. Refractions for Bill Harold. Why should it happen that the smallest zigzagging black cricket, one stick leg raised, a musician's baton, holds and then releases the same song as my canoe paddle, slicing into glass? Boundary Waters' evening lake, still mirroring like memory doubles, you here and gone, now leaning akimbo, a cricket musician, message encoded in meter, in the rhythm of my own arms, paddling side to side, as if I could find you in the funnel of each stroke, in the blue sluice of time. And light grabs my breath again, peering into that one space where ledge rock dissolves into color, cascades gray and rust and moss green, effortlessly transforming at water's edge, tumbling headlong into repetition, unfolding mere image into the depthless eternity of reflection, until in that moment I forget which side of vision is mere reality, and that this bent black line of insect can sing, and more, that every chirp should count in precise degrees, just how cold is loss. Great.